Well, good morning. You know, it's about 24 years ago we determined that we do not want to be the kind of church that is a typical church where 20% of the people do 80% of the work and 20% of the people give 80% of the money. We want to be the kind of church where we're a family. We're an army marching together where everybody is doing their part. And so if you haven't had an opportunity to find your place to serve, that card on your chair is all about giving you that opportunity. And I encourage you not to leave this place today without saying, you know what, I'm going to invest a few hours into advancing my church. If you haven't found a place to give, I just encourage you to come back next weekend with that card filled out, and we are going to advance what God is doing in this place. I want to welcome everybody at the fire hall over at the warehouse, our friends up in Churchill, everybody watching online live right now or during the week, and of course everybody here at the factory. I love the fact that we're a church that's spread all over the place, and yet we're one church marching together, and we got some great things that God's doing in our church. So it is Father's Day. And I was thinking about my dad this last week, and I was kind of shocked to realize that if my dad was still alive, he'd be 104 years old today. My dad, I came into his life when he was 50 years old. He had my brother when he was 53. So I spent my childhood listening to my dad's stories of the good old days because my dad had an entire life before I ever came along. And you know, those stories he would tell them with such energy as the good old days, and I would think they sound like the horrible, rotten old days. Like, they sound like really difficult days. But yeah, that's me and my dad. This is me and my dad chilling together on the couch in our house. Love the paneling and the drapes and the sweater and all that good stuff. This is me and my dad dressed in our black suits. I have no idea why my little brother is dressed as a sailor. Probably explains a few things of how he turned out. But my dad was born in Herbert, Saskatchewan in 1915. And way back in 1915 and through the 20s, actually, Herbert, Saskatchewan was a pretty prosperous kind of place. The heads of grain were tall and plump, and the grain harvests were great, which brought good fortune. However, by the time my dad turned 14 years old, that was the beginning of a decade where drought was going to suck the life out of the prairies. And it was so bad that they had sand drifts and topsoil drifts that actually looked like snow drifts. It was a very, very difficult time. This is when they had these mind-blowing dust storms. The Great Depression was part of this 10-year history, and of course, hard times for everyone. But my dad managed to find work as a authentic, real cowboy. And he would actually, as a child, I remember my dad would tell me story after story after story about the days where he actually was a cowboy on the prairies of Saskatchewan. It always was sort of curious to me, though, how he would interchange terminology. One minute he'd be talking about cowboys, and then he would talk about cowpokes, and then he would talk about cowhands, and then he would talk about cowpunchers. And I was like, where did this terminology come from? Like, what in the world is a cowpoke, and what is a cowpuncher, and why would somebody want to punch a cow? Like, I didn't quite understand this. And it turns out that by the time my dad was born, these were fairly new inventions. These words, cowpoke and cowpuncher, they'd only been around for about 30 years. And they came out of a season of history down in the States starting about 1870. You see, what happened was that back in the 1870s, there were Texas ranchers way down in the southern Texas that had these large, large ranches of cattle, and they began to realize there was a very lucrative market for their meat up in Chicago and east of Chicago. However, the only problem was that there were no trains that ran north to south. There was only east to west trains. So somehow they had to get their cattle from Texas to Nebraska, 1,000 miles north, so that they can load them on trains so they could go to Chicago. So they came up with a very audacious and daring plan to walk their cows 1,000 miles north from Texas to Nebraska. And once they got there, they would need to load them onto the trains. And of course, there were these chutes and these ramps, and the cows were not very excited about getting on a train. And so what they would have is some poles, and they would poke the cow, or they would punch the cow with these poles, and so they became known as cowpokes or cowpunchers. Now, as I was poking around my dad's history and upbringing, I also came to the place where I kind of found myself imagining what that must have been like. I find myself imagining being out on the prairies during one of these cattle drives up from Texas all the way to Nebraska. And as I was out there in my imagination, it collided with 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which we all read in our chapter day reading plan this last Thursday. And I saw 1 Corinthians 13 all over those prairies and in this picture. And I thought, wow, I've never seen 1 Corinthians 13 like this before. So here's what I would love for you to do today. Is I'd love for you to hop on your horse, and we're going to go join the cattle drive for a few minutes, all right? So we're going to go out there, and it's 1870. There are about 3,500 actually, Texas longhorn cows that we need to move from Texas to Nebraska. These are 2,000-pound animals, 3,500 of them. There's going to be about 16 to 18 other cowpunchers along with you, and you're going to be sitting on that horse for at least 2 months every single day, driving these cattle north to Nebraska. Now, most of the time it's going to be absolutely boring. Most of the time you're just going to be riding along, and there's going to be no activity, and it's just going to be extremely boring, and these cows are going to be very docile. Occasionally, one might wander off a little bit. You might have to run and just sort of guide it back onto the trail. But most of the time, 95% of the time, it's just going to be routine and boring. However, as a cowpuncher, you need to be ready for chaos at any moment. Because what inevitably is going to happen on this trail is that some cow is going to get spooked. Some cow is going to step on a stick and it's going to spook another one, or they're going to see a rattlesnake, or something is going to spook them. And as soon as one cow gets spooked, they're going to spook all the other cows and poke all the other cows around them. And then what's going to happen? You're going to have a stampede. There's going to be a stampede of 3,500, 2,000-pound animals running any direction they want. It's going to be utter chaos. Back in 1948, the actor John Wayne, he starred in a movie called Red River, and what the movie was about, it was about a fictitious telling of the very first ever cattle drive. And what the filmmakers wanted the audience to feel was the terror of a stampede, and so 70 years ago, here was their take on a stampede. All right, so 70-year-old movie making is a little bit hokey, but what they were trying to communicate is the terror of a stampede. And I love how, when he yells stampede, I mean, these guys, they were in their long johns and they didn't bother putting on their jeans or their shirts. I mean, they just jumped on because you need to be ready at any moment. But the point was this, that when a stampede happens, and I want you to keep this picture in your mind, when a stampede happens, something's going to get trampled. Something's going to get destroyed. Something's going to get ripped apart, or somebody is going to get killed, because that's what happens in a stampede. Now, you're probably sitting there going, okay, I am really, really confused right now, because somehow you saw 1 Corinthians 13 in this whole cattle drive picture. Where in the world is 1 Corinthians 13? Because everybody knows 1 Corinthians 13 is the love chapter. It's a chapter the pastor always reads at a wedding, because that's where you've heard it most often quoted, is at a wedding. This must be the wedding chapter, right? And you're sitting there going, there are no cattle drives, there are no Texas longhorns, there are no cowpunchers, there's not even a steak or a hamburger in 1 Corinthians 13. There's nothing. So what in the world, how in the world do you see 1 Corinthians 13 in this? Well, let me take you back a couple of weekends ago. We started our walk through Corinth. I said to you, we're going to spend 16 days in Corinth, and as we do, we're going to every single day come up against another problem. because the book of 1 Corinthians really is all about conflict. It's all about problems. And every day in your reading, you came up against another discrepancy, another quarrel, another argument, another difficulty or disagreement. Just to review a few of them, there's over 16 of them, but just to review a few, there was incest in the church in Corinth. And there was all sorts of pride, and there was all sorts of competition. Oh, I like this leader, but I don't like that leader. Which leader do you like? I like that leader, but I don't like this leader. And they were dividing over their leaders. There were people in the church who were sleeping with people that they weren't married to. And there were people who were taking other people to court. They were having these quarrels and arguments and lawsuits going on. And so what Paul does is Paul in 1 Corinthians 13, it's not a wedding chapter. It's not a lovey red heart with an arrow through it chapter. It's not a romantic chapter. This is a chapter where Paul says, listen, when you're in a conflict, this is what you need to remember. Because this is the trail we need to be traveling when you're in a conflict. And so let's begin to study the Word of God together. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 1. I could speak all the languages of earth and of angels, but didn't love others, I would only be a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I had the gift of prophecy and I understood all of God's secret plans and possessed all knowledge, the Corinthians were big into wisdom and knowledge, and if I had such faith that I could move mountains but didn't love others, I'd be nothing. If I gave everything that I have to the poor and even sacrificed my body, I could boast about it. But if I didn't love others, I would have gained nothing. What I see Paul doing here is he's taking the precious crystal bowls and ornaments that the Corinthians have set up and saying, this is true spirituality. And this is what they polish and they honor so much. He takes the first one and he sets it down. It's a beautiful big crystal bowl. And he says, look, that crystal bowl is speaking in tongues. It's speaking an ecstatic, mysterious, supernatural language that you never learned, but you're able to speak. It's a supernatural, spiritual language. You love that when people are speaking in tongues. And he sets it there. And then on top of that, he sets this gift of prophecy. He says you could have this crystal bowl, this beautiful spirituality where God has actually downloaded messages from heaven into your heart that you can speak to other people, and it's authentic. It's obviously a God message. You could have that. And then on top of tongues and prophecy, he says you could have this great big beautiful crystal bowl of faith. Faith pulsating in you. So much faith in you that you could say, mountain over here, move into the sea, and it would move. You could say, lay hands on somebody who's got cancer or who has got a disease, and you could pray for them and they would be healed. You could have so much faith in you, and then he sets two more crystal ornaments on top of that. He says you could be somebody who sells your house, sells your car, cashes in all of your savings in your RSP, and gives it all to Siloam Mission, just to benefit them so you become poor, so they become rich. Or you could be somebody, the last crystal ornament he sets up there, you could be somebody who is so serious about their faith that you spend 5 years in jail and end up getting executed because you would refuse to renounce the name of Jesus Christ. That's how strong your faith was. And then what he does is he comes over and with one little finger, he tips them all over. And they come crashing down and breaking down into a million shards of glass. And he says, here's my point. If they are not held together in love, not a one of them means anything. It does not matter what your loftiest goal is, or how great your plans or your ambitions or your desires or your passions are. If you do not have love, it's nothing. It will amount to nothing. He says love is superior. Love is the glue that holds it all together. And then, as if the Corinthians are saying, yeah, but what is love? How do we even define love? What is love? He goes on to define love. Verse 4. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous. Oh, it doesn't boast, and it's not proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable. It keeps no records of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. This is what love is. And so as I was in my imagination riding out on one of these cattle drives, I saw the Texas longhorn cows as our emotions. And you know what? They don't always go where we want them to go, do they? Lots of times our emotions get spooked and they run off in a stampede and they destroy things. Somebody's going to get hurt. Something's going to get trampled. Something's going to die out there because of these crazy emotions that just run away and they get all spooked and stampeded. And I saw the cowboys, the cowpunchers, as you and me. You see, we're separate from our emotions. We're the ones that need to rein those emotions in. And I saw 1 Corinthians 13 as the trail that God was laying before us, saying, you want to take this relationship from here to there? It's going to be a long 1,000-mile road, and you're going to have to stick to the trail of love. But along that road, your emotions are going to get spooked so many times, and you're going to have these stampedes so many times that you're going to have to learn how to jump on your horse in your long johns without even putting your clothes on and go out and just rein those emotions in, because that is paramount. So this last week, I had my share of conflicts. Every single day we have our share of conflicts. You had your share of conflicts. Some of them were momentary and very quick. One of them was when a guy cut me off while I was driving. And I just felt the emotions rise up really quick, and there was like this mini stampede that was happening. And some of them were with your spouse. Carolyn and I probably locked horns 2 or 3 times this week. And there was just these little moments of kind of, poking each other and little possible stampedes that would be looking at starting. Maybe it was with a coworker. Maybe it was with your kids. Kids can cause stampedes every single day, right? I mean, there can be these stampedes that happen emotionally. I don't know where yours was or what happened. I can tell you that one of the things I like to do is I like to monitor my own heart. I like to kind of take a mirror and say, what's going on inside of there? I don't know if you do that. It's really a great exercise, actually, to ask yourself, why am I feeling what I'm feeling right now? I see the dust rising all over the place, and I can tell there's a stampede going on inside, but why is there a stampede going on inside? And so this last week, I sort of monitored my own heart a few times, and I found that I had this Texas longhorn emotion of feeling threatened by another success. Have you ever had that? Have you ever had somebody share some really good news with you? I just made this purchase. I just landed this contract. I just had this experience. And suddenly there's this emotion of feeling threatened by their success. I had that. I didn't choose that. But I had a little stampede of emotion run away when I was kind of feeling threatened by somebody else's success this week. Now, I had another moment where I was in a conversation and I had this sensation of being undervalued. I thought, man, this person doesn't appreciate anything I just did for them. And I was feeling this undervalued thing, and there was this stampede that kind of went off in that direction. Then I had another moment where there was actually probably about 6 or 7 different Texas longhorn emotions that decided to poke each other, and they were all trying to start a riot inside of me. One was feeling taken advantage of. One was feeling like all I ever do is disappoint people. How is it that I'm a leader, and as a lead pastor, I seem to hurt people and make people mad and disappoint people? And I had this sensation of why do I always disappoint people so much? I had this feeling of being suffocated by the demands that were kind of coming into my life, and I couldn't breathe. It was like, oh my goodness, I just need a little bit of breathing space, but I was feeling suffocated. I had another one that was worry, and another that actually poked, probably about 8 different times this week was this Texas Longhorn branded annoyance. There were just people that annoyed me this week, and they just sort of would cause this little stampede to happen. And when you have these little stampedes, the craziest thing is that most of us think the way to handle this is to jump on the emotion and ride it out until it sort of just runs itself out. Are you kidding me? That's nonsense. We were not called to ride out the stampede and just sort of go wherever these emotions want to go, because these emotions are liars, these emotions are tricky, and these emotions are trying to destroy something. It's not that they're all wholesome and got some great ideas. I mean, they're trying to destroy something. So your job as a cowpuncher on this cattle drive is to actually go and cut the emotion off and rein it in back onto the trail of 1 Corinthians 13. Your job is to bring that Texas Longhorn emotion, that stampeding, back to the trail. And so 1 Corinthians 13 teaches us how to do that. You know, often we'll get spooked. I mean, think about it. Let's take some of these emotions apart. Sometimes you'll get spooked by a conversation and you'll begin to feel impatient. And you'll begin to feel like you have a short fuse and you just want to go off on that person. And you begin to feel easily annoyed and hurt. And Paul says, whoa, cut it off. Jump on that horse, just ride out there and cut that off and bring it back, because he says on the trail we're riding, love is patient and kind. Love isn't impatient. Love doesn't go just spouting off its anger and frustration. No, it doesn't just ride the emotion wherever the emotion wants to go. Love actually reins it in and keeps it on the trail, because love is patient and love is kind. When we're frightened in a conversation or in a situation and feel out of control, there's great clouds of dust that get stirred up by our emotions, and let's think about them. Some of them we feel really protective. Sometimes we feel resentful. Other times we end up feeling jealous of the other person. Or maybe we feel undervalued, so we have to kind of tell them about our self-importance. And I can just hear Paul seeing this stampede going on in us and yelling, "Stampede! Jump on your horse and go rein that in. Go and cut that emotion off. Don't let it run wherever it wants to run, because it's going to destroy something. You're the boss, rein it in, because on the trail we're called to walk, love is not jealous. Love is not boastful. Love is not proud. Love is not rude. And love does not demand its own way. Love actually sits down to listen to the other person and say, help me understand what you're asking for, what you're wanting in this situation. Help me understand what you're thinking or how you see this situation. Love doesn't just demand its own way. Do you see what Paul's doing here? He's saying, listen, every time you feel impatient, every time you feel jealous, every time you feel prideful, every time you boast, every time you feel irritated, every time you distrust, every time you feel bitter, every time you are unwilling to really listen to somebody else, every time you demand your own way, that is not love. And you cannot claim to be a person that is full of love and is a loving person if you're doing those things, because that is not the trail that we're called to walk. That is off the trail, and that's where the stampede happens. 1 Corinthians 13 really is a litmus test. Do you remember in chemistry class where you used to take the litmus paper and you used to dip it in a different liquid, and then it would turn a color, and that color would tell you what the compound was that was in that liquid? Well, this here is a litmus test where you get to rub the paper up against that emotion that you're watching stampede away, and it'll tell you whether it's love or not. And if it's impatient or boastful or prideful or any of these things that he mentions, it is not love. And therefore, you need to rein it in and call it back to the trail of love. He goes on, love is not irritable, and it does not keep record of being wronged. I love this one. Let's just pause on this one for a moment. Some other translations say that love keeps no account of wrong, and that's really good because the original word is actually an accounting word. But here's the deal. On this trail that we're riding, there are very few things you get to take with you, and there is not room in your pack on your horse for a big ledger and a whole bunch of pencils and a pencil sharpener. There isn't room for you to keep a ledger of all the wrongs that somebody else has done against you. Now, that sounds really good, doesn't it? But how do we practically not keep a ledger of the wrongs that other people do against us? Well, I want to suggest 3 levels of intensity and 3 levels of action. And here's the first one. You need to remember to forget. This is hard for us, but you need to learn to remember to forget. You know, we go over stuff that we want to remember, don't we? When you were a kid and you had a spelling test or a spelling bee, you would go over and over and over and over those words because you wanted to remember them. Later on, when you're in your chemistry class and you get the table of elements and you got all those elements that you need to try and remember, you go over and over and over them because you wanted to remember them. When you go to the grocery store, you go over and over your grocery list in your mind if you didn't write it down because you want to remember it. You go over the stuff you want to remember. And so when you're going over and over and over in your mind how somebody else has offended you or hurt you, it's because you want to remember that. And what Paul says is that you need to learn to remember to forget. James Broderick, in a book that he wrote, The Progress of the Jesuits, is talking about Pope Pius IV. And this is what he observed about him. He said this: he never forgot a slight done to him, and that was his fundamental weakness. He might have appeared to bury the hatchet, but he always marked where the hatchet was buried. Yeah, that's some of us, isn't it? If we were pressed and somebody said, well, have you forgiven that person? Oh, yes, I forgave them. Absolutely, I forgave them. But then 2 years later, when you're in the heat of an argument, you have marked exactly where that hatchet is that you buried, and you go and dig it up. And Paul says, no, you can't do that. You've got to actually pull up the stake, plant grass over it, and forget where that hatchet is. There is no room on this journey for you to carry a ledger and a bunch of pencils. Now, that's kind of a homegrown variety of offense. What happens if this is a more industrial strength offense against you? If it's a little bit stickier, if it's a little bit of a more difficult, serious kind of violation of you, then what do? Well, that's where we move to level 2. You need to remember that you are them. You need to remember that you are actually them. Psalm 103 helps me with this every time. Measure how high the heaven is above the earth. God's wide, loving, kind heart is greater for those who revere him. You see, God takes all of our crimes, our seemingly inexhaustible sins, and he removes them from us. As far as the east is from the west, he removes them from us. You are them. And this is why I am very, very careful when I point an accusatory finger, because I always remember I'm actually them and they're me. We often get into a conflict situation and we put that other person down and we puff ourselves up, right? But the reality is that you are them. What I mean is this: maybe they have hurt you, maybe they've offended you, maybe, yes, that person disappointed or frustrated you, but then I remember that I have hurt and I have offended, and I have disappointed, and I have frustrated God, and yet what does God do? God says, Todd, I'm going to take all that hurt, frustration, offense, sin, crime, all the stuff that you have committed, and I'm going to remove it from you, and I'm going to take it, and when I look at you, I'm going to remove it as far as the east is from the west. And I always think, you know what? If God himself could take the ledger and his pencils, and if he can break all the pencils, and if he could take and burn the ledger and destroy it so that he does not look at me with my sins from the past, then who am I to keep my pencils sharp and to keep my ledger up to date? You can't, because you are them. And God has forgiven you of your offenses, and therefore you need to forgive others of their offenses. Now, what happens if this is a super sticky, super high industrial kind of disappointment or frustration or violation or hurt? What if it goes so deep that it requires vengeance? Well, then you have to go to level 3. Level 3 action is remember to turn it over to God. Romans 12. Again, my loved ones, do not seek revenge. Instead, allow God's wrath to make sure justice is served. Oh, justice will be served. It will be served. It needs to be served. But look at this. Allow God's wrath to make sure that justice is served. Turn it over to him, for the scripture says, revenge is mine. God says, I will settle all scores. Revenge is mine. I will settle all scores. There are some hurts, some wounds, some violations, some disappointments, some pain in your life that requires vengeance and settling of a score and injustice being made right. And on those occasions, you need to say, God, this is one of those occasions when vengeance is required. So I'm going to let you take care of the vengeance, because there's no room on this trail that I'm walking for revenge or for vengeance. I'm going to let you settle the score. I'm going to leave it with you and let you take care of it. There's a debt that needs to be paid. There's a reckoning that needs to happen. There's an injustice that needs to be made right. So God, you said it's your job to do that, not mine, so I'm not going to do it. I'm going to leave it with you. That's the best I can do, to explain to you how to not keep a record of wrong. Number one, Level 1 action, remember to forget. Level 2, remember that you are actually them. And you stand in the very same seat of accusation when it comes to God. And number 3, remember to turn it over to God. And then Paul wraps up his description of the trail with this: it does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up. Love never loses faith. It always hopes and endures through every circumstance. Unfortunately, there are far more stories of wild stampedes and people like us falling off our horses and getting trampled by our emotions than there are of successful stories of reining in those emotions. However, I found inspiration from an old British poet named Alfred Lord Tennyson, who was describing Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, who gave his life for his faith. But this is what he said of the Archbishop: to do him hurt was to beget a kindness from him. You hurt him, you were going to get kindness back. His heart was made of such fine soil that if you planted in it the seeds of hate, they blossomed love. Wow. Before supper time tonight, you're going to feel a stampede. Guaranteed in the next 24 hours, you're going to watch some emotions stampede away. And something is going to be planted in your heart. An irritation, a worry, a fear, something of pride welling up inside of you, or a feeling of competition, or some of the 3,500 different longhorns are going to go crazy inside of you. And there's going to be a seed planted inside of you. And here, Cranmer was somebody who had this seed planted inside of him of hate, but what blossomed was love. What a great illustration. Now, that's all theory. That's about 25 minutes of theory. Sounds good, doesn't it? Preaches. It's great. How does it work itself out in the practical, real world? When you're really in one of those situations, what does that actually look like? Well, about 3 months ago in February, I was in the midst of a conversation that ended up being a conversation with 7 people, so now we got 24,000 Texas Longhorn emotions in the room. And there was a lot of poking going on. And there was a lot of little stampedes starting to happen emotionally. And for the last 3 months, we've been working really, really hard with the 7 of us to figure out, how do you actually live the trail of love in the midst of the real world? And so to share a little bit of that story, I'd love to invite our youth pastor, Mark, and his wife, Roberta, and our creative director, Zach. Would you guys come and share with me? And we're going to have a little conversation about this. And we're going to kind of unzip our souls a little bit and tell you a bit of a story and tell you how this works out in the real world. So, February 21st of this year, the 3 of you came to Carolyn and I out of office hours and sat down and said, we have something we want to share with you. That began all sorts of little stampedes of emotions. And to sort of set it up and tell us the story, Mark, why don't you start?
Yeah, so when I was about 19 years old, I was in my first year of Bible college, and I didn't really know much about anything. I had just become a Christian a few years before, and God kind of just put this dream in my heart, and it was the dream to plant a church. I had no knowledge or understanding of church planting, so I kind of was just like, oh, sweet, well, maybe one day I'll plant a church, and I just kind of put it to the side and left it. Graduated Bible college, got married to Roberta. We ended up moving here about 4 years ago, joined the team at Riverwood, have loved every single moment of it. We befriended Zach, who is one of our best friends, and God kind of just supernaturally orchestrated just us coming together, and what started as my dream to plant a church became something that we began to talk about, and it became our dream that one day we would co-lead a church together and we would pioneer a faith community. And we're like, sweet, okay, so one day that might happen. And we kind of put it to the side and just continued to do our thing. And in November of last year at our youth conference, during one of the sessions, Roberta just kind of had this vision that chains broke off of her. And as we began to process what that was, because she didn't at the moment know, she realized that it was the chains of insecurity and feeling unworthy to be a pastor. We actually went to Vanguard together. We have the same degree. Roberta is trained to be a pastor, but she kind of put that aside because she was struggling with a number of things, and God kind of just broke those chains off and said, no, you're actually called to be a pastor. You're called to lead in the church. And so what started as my dream, and then mine and Zach's dream, became all three of our dream. And so we kind of thought the timeline was about 2022 when we would kind of step out and plant the church. So we went to Pastor Todd and Carolyn in February and said, hey, this is kind of what we're thinking. And they were like, sweet, thanks for letting us know and filling us in. And we left that meeting, and obviously they continued the process and figured out what this would look like, and we continued. And as we processed, as we talked, as we kind of got counsel from other leaders, we felt like 2022 was probably too far away. And so we actually prayed and fasted for just under a month, and we came back together and we were like, yeah, we feel like God is kind of nudging us and releasing us to go a year sooner. So we came back to the senior leaders and we were like, hey, we're thinking 2021. And they were like, sweet, thanks for that. And
I don't know if we actually said sweet.
They didn't say sweet.
I don't remember, like if you're quoting us, I don't remember any sweetness about it. There's more terror, I think.
Yeah.
But if you want to interpret it as sweet, that's fine. Okay.
My version is they were super, super pumped.
Yeah, okay.
So we told them 2021, and then we kind of just began to process together, and we actually realized like we were wrong on that as well, and that God actually wanted the church that he had given us a vision for to happen sooner. And so we're here to kind of inform our church family that we will be planting a church next fall, so September of 2020 here in Winnipeg. So we're super excited about it, but we're also terrified. But that means that as of August 31st of this year, myself and Zach will step down from our roles and kind of go full speed ahead into the church plant. Roberta will continue in her role as a social worker for the next little while. But yeah, just bringing you up to speed on our journey the last several months.
All right. So, Zach, as we've been working this through, and I don't even think we could begin to explain to people how many hours and how many conversations and how many meetings and how many off the hours of thinking and processing and how intense this has been. Like, it really has been a very intense process. But one of the phrases that we've been using both interchangeably is we want this to be a win-win. What does that mean, and how did we arrive at that, and what does it take to actually make it a win-win?
Yeah, I think for us going into this process, the counsel and the wisdom that we got from a lot of people who had planted churches was how you leave is how you'll start. And so we really wanted to do this process well. And Riverwood, a bit of Riverwood's story is that Todd and Carolyn really had a heart to plant a church, and were very honoring to their leaders, but that wasn't received well. And they sort of stepped out of their old church and didn't know what was going to happen. And through God's goodness, here we are today. But just based on all of those experiences and that wisdom, we realized that we really wanted to do this well. That was something that the three of us really wanted, and also something the senior leaders really wanted. And we declared that right at the start. We said, we want to do this process well. We want to actually write the book on what it looks like to plant a church. Now, not literally, but you never know. But yeah, we really wanted to do that. And so something that we've continued to work towards in all of our conversations is making sure that we're leaving those conversations still loving each other, still caring about each other. We love Riverwood. We want to leave Riverwood and set it up to succeed and grow and flourish and thrive. And the senior leaders have said the same for us, that they want our church plant to thrive. And yeah, so I mean, yes, it's difficult conversations, but I think for us, it's remembering that we're all on the same team. This is a kingdom move for us. And so our church will not be a Riverwood church. It's not going to be Riverwood 2.0 or anything like that. We'll be an autonomous church. Yeah, it'll be an autonomous church. But the senior leaders have really come with some strategic ways that they can help support us and send us out well.
Yeah, so some of the strategies or some of the practical ways that we're going to try and do that is, first of all, there's an organization these guys are going to be planting with called ARC, and they give you a lot of guidance, a lot of coaching. There's application you need to make. We're going to, as a church, pay for their application, pay for your intensive training there, and your travel expenses to get there and do all that sort of stuff. That'll happen probably this summer sometime. Also, in order to go with ARC, they need their church leadership to sign on and say, we affirm you guys as pastors and as church planters and your character, and we're going to do that. Also, ARC is going to lend you $50,000, advance you $50,000, and they need somebody to kind of co-sign the loan. It doesn't mean that Riverwood's actually going to put $50,000 out. However, if you should default on it, we'll be on the hook for the 50 grand. Now, they have a very good track record, only 7% default, which is great. Plus, we also know you guys, and we have full confidence in you that we won't actually need to put that money out. But we're going to underwrite that, and it's a very serious commitment. Plus, there's some other strategic ways that we're going to actually be able to do that. During this journey, I've had to sort of, again, put the mirror to my own soul and say, what's going on. I had to use the litmus test on my own attitudes, and they haven't always, there's been lots of stampeding going on for all of us, right? Like, we got to be honest about that. But as I've put the litmus test on there, I have 3 litmus tests that have helped me understand where I land on this. The first one is that for Carolyn and I, our 3 daughters are intrinsically connected to you guys. You have had such a spiritual impact on their lives. They love you. They work with you on all sorts of fronts of the ministry here. And so we've actually, Carolyn and I, right off the bat, said to all 3 of our daughters, listen, if you guys want to go be part of this church plant, you have our blessing. Just go and have a blast, and it's an adventure, and go do that. That kind of felt like the path of love for us. Another one was, as lead pastors, we often get feelings of competition. What should happen if this young buckaroo should end up, planning a church that goes, 3 times bigger than Riverwood? What if they're better than us, right? How do I feel about that? And where I landed on that was, you know what? My genuine prayer is that the church you plant will be 2, 3, 4, 5 times bigger and more effective, more impacting of the city than Riverwood ever could be. And so that's sort of like, that feels like a love thing, right? And then the third one was that you guys don't have parents in the city, so you've been at our place for Christmas dinner for the last number of years, and that's going to quit right now. No more. No, we said, you know what, you've already got the invitation for Christmas dinner this year, because what you're wondering right now is, okay, nice spin, but what's the real story? The real story is this has been excruciating. This has been so painful. And my Texas Longhorn emotions have poked you guys, and we've had to talk about that. Yours have poked us, and we've had to talk about that, but we have talked about it, and we have landed again. Every time we keep coming back to that road of love, right? So this is real. So, Roberta, future pastor Roberta, on this journey of Longhorn emotions, what have you learned and what have you experienced?
I think I've learned so many things. I thought I was an emotional person, but wow, I really am. I think the biggest thing is emotions lie. And sometimes even the situations we're dealing with, it's not even to do with what's happening, but it's past hurt that comes out. And I think that's a huge thing that our emotions can do. So it's learning to take them and to steer them, like you said, back on the path. And so I think what's been incredible is that we've had the opportunity to process with you guys. And I think what I've learned is just how much love there is in the room. Every time we walk out, I feel more loved, I feel more affirmed, I feel more confident, and like truly, truly, truly love our pastors so, so much. So that's what I've learned.
But all we would need to do to kill that love would be for any of us to ride that emotion away on the stampede and not bring it back in, right? We have to keep bringing it back in, right? So right now, we have now stirred up a pile of Longhorn emotions in many people. You're going to have students, you're going to have young adults, part of the Ascent. You're going to have people on your creative team that are going, what, how do I feel about this, right? Now we're all going to have to walk that road of love together. And one of the things we can do is we can come around you in a very genuine way, and our senior leaders and elders have processed this thing so much. And so I'm going to ask the senior leaders and elders that are in the room right now to come up, and we want to just take a moment to pray for you guys. And I'm going to ask everybody here at the factory, at the warehouse, at the fire hall, wherever you are, to just in Starbucks watching, just stand right now, and let's just take a moment to pray for these guys as they launch out. Just take a step forward there, and elders and senior leaders, come and join me as we lay hands on them. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we don't always understand the dynamics that are going on in your planning and your scheming of how you're going to grow your church. We do know that so many times this moment has gone wrong, and we just don't want to be part of a moment that goes wrong. We want to be part of a moment that we can hold our heads high and say, wow, that was hard. And there was some scary stampede moments, but we were able to bring it back to the trail of love. And God, I just pray your blessing on Mark and on Roberta, Pastor Roberta in the future, and on Pastor Zach in the future. God, I just pray that you would bless them with all the giftings and all the energy and all the faith that they need. But whatever ambitions they have, whatever dreams they have, whatever hopes for the future that they have, I pray that it would just be pulsating with love, that they would stay on the trail of love. And God, I pray for Riverwood. I pray for this transition that we're about to go into now. And needless to say, there are leaders that these folks have trained up and recruited that are hurting right now because they don't know what's happening. There's change happening, and nobody likes change. And God, so I pray for your grace to be all over our church as well. We pray for the next youth pastor, God, that you would already be designing and calling that person into that place, the next creative director. God, I pray that you would lead us through this process over the next year and a half, and from now till August 31st. And in those dark moments, may these three just see a light burst into their hearts, a light of faith, a light of courage that they never even knew possible. Take them to places so much deeper with you and provide for them, we pray. We ask nothing but your blessing on them and the church they plant. And all the people said, amen. We just stay standing at all of our sites. We're going to take a moment to respond together in song.